They called my $50,000 orchids weeds. I smiled because I was ready to prove them wrong. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, March 10th, 2025, in Austin, Texas. The wind whispered through the magnolia and live oak lining my street, carrying the faint fragrance of blooming jasmine from a neighbor's yard. I had stepped outside to fetch the mail, coffee still steaming in my hand, and there it was. A standard HOA envelope, crisp, official looking, with that familiar return address, the Riverside Homeowners Association. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Clayton, the HOA president, had always had this way of making everyone feel small without raising his voice. But nothing had prepared me for the moment I unfolded that paper. Dear Mr. Elijah Turner, it began, each word punching me in the chest. It has come to the attention of the HOA board that certain plantings in your backyard, specifically what you call orchids, do not conform to the landscaping standards set forth in our governing documents. These plantings are hereby deemed weeds and must be removed within 14 days. I felt a brief surge of disbelief, then calm determination. I had spent decades cultivating each specimen, carefully imported, nurtured, and maintained. My collection wasn't a garden. It was a lifetime of devotion, $50,000 worth of rare Vanda, Phalaenopsis, and Catalia orchids, each with shipping invoices, appraisal certificates, and meticulous photographs dating back years. And Clayton had the audacity to call them weeds. I glanced up at the small crowd of HOA board members gathered near the clubhouse window. Clayton was smirking, clearly expecting a flustered reaction. Marcy, the treasurer, gave an approving nod, while Peter, the secretary, jotted notes with the seriousness of a man signing a death warrant. They were certain I'd fold, sure that a retired horticulturist couldn't defend decades of painstaking labor against a petty authority. I felt the leaves of my $7,500 Vanda shiver in the breeze near the garden gate. I walked over, knelt, and ran my fingers over the velvety petals, inhaling the faint, sweet fragrance that always grounded me. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, ensuring the date stamp was visible, and sent it to Dr. Mills, my trusted botanist and longtime friend. Look at this, I typed. March 10th, 2025. They called it a weed. While waiting for her response, I carefully slipped the HOA letter into a protective plastic sleeve, taped it to my desk for safekeeping, and marked the date in my personal ledger. Every document, every receipt, every appraisal I had would become evidence, and I needed it all accounted for. I had learned long ago that when your passion is attacked, preparation is the first weapon. I remembered Clayton's tone during the last board meeting, where he casually remarked, "We'll see how much patience old Elijah has left when it comes to those plants." I had smiled then, but inside I felt the familiar stirrings of strategy. This wasn't about anger, it was about precision. Every moment of planting, every invoice, every botanical journal entry would serve a greater purpose. Dr. Mills replied within minutes. I subs am appalled. Let SEPs document everything immediately. High-resolution photos, market appraisals, shipment records. We can make this airtight. I exhaled slowly, letting the calm wash over me. That was all I needed to hear. I spent the morning photographing each orchid individually, capturing the subtle gradient of color in the Phalaenopsis petals, the delicate ruffles of the Cattleyas, the intricate patterns on the Vandas. I jotted notes in my garden journal: date of purchase, vendor, shipping method, price, any past appraisals, and even the number of hours spent tending to each plant. At noon, I took the envelope and the photographs into my study. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across my desk. I organized each document in chronological order: invoices first, receipts second, photographs third, and then appraisals and letters from previous botanists. Each piece of paper crinkled under my fingers, a tactile reminder of the tangible value I had invested, not just financially but emotionally. Then I drafted a quick text to Jenna, my next-door neighbor and discreet observer. Clayton sets it again. Meeting your eyes in 30? Within moments, her reply came on my porch. Watching dawn set worry, they one set see you sweat. I smiled. Jenna had always been a quiet but loyal witness, someone who could observe without interference. She understood the stakes. This wasn't just a garden dispute. It was a matter of principle and, more importantly, legacy. I leaned back, sipping my now lukewarm coffee, and allowed myself a flashback. 30 years ago, I had brought my first Phalaenopsis home in a cardboard box, trembling with excitement as I unwrapped the delicate roots and gently potted it. I remembered the joy of seeing it bloom for the first time, the months of patience, the nights spent carefully adjusting humidity and light. Every plant in my collection carried a memory, a story, a part of me. Clayton's notice was more than an insult. It was a threat to a life carefully built in quiet devotion. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through years of invoices. A vanda I had acquired in 2018 from a boutique grower in Singapore, $7,500 including shipping and customs, was now a weed. The irony was intoxicating. I saved each receipt as a PDF, time-stamped and backed up on cloud storage. Nothing could be lost, nothing could be misinterpreted. Every detail mattered. By mid-afternoon, I had drafted a preliminary plan. I would not respond with heat. I would respond with facts. The orchid's market value, professional appraisals, and detailed receipts would speak louder than anger ever could. Clayton's smirk would crumble under the weight of evidence. I could almost imagine the look on his face when I revealed the full ledger. He would be surprised not by confrontation but by meticulous, undeniable proof. Returning to the garden, I walked slowly among the rows of orchids, letting my fingers trail along leaves, checking that each stake and support was properly aligned. A gentle breeze stirred the petals, carrying their fragrance like a quiet declaration of resilience. I made a note of each plant's GPS coordinate within the garden layout, another layer of documentation, ensuring that nothing could be claimed as overgrowth or misplaced. Later, I texted Dr. Mills again, detailing the specific orchids I wanted appraised first, emphasizing the rare hybrids, the Vanda tricolor alba, the deep purple Phalaenopsis, the golden Cattleya. I attached high-resolution photos with date stamps and invoice references. Her reply was swift and concise. "We start tomorrow. Bring all receipts, shipping logs, and correspondence with vendors. We'll need airtight verification." That night, I sat by the window, listening to the faint rustle of leaves outside, reflecting on what had just occurred. Clayton believed he had the upper hand. He thought I would fold under bureaucratic pressure. He did not know the depth of my patience, the meticulous record-keeping, nor the network I had built over decades. He had underestimated both my resolve and the moral authority I wielded. I imagined him at the board meeting, smug, oblivious to the storm of documentation and expert testimony I was preparing. I documented every small step, photographing the notice again, capturing the HOA logo at the top, noting the ink type and paper weight, even recording the time I opened it, 11:03 a.m. in my ledger. These details would later prove critical, forming a chronological thread that even the most skeptical board member could not ignore. Before retiring for the night, I walked through the garden one last time, inhaling the combined aroma of damp soil and orchid blossoms. Each plant seemed to hum with quiet strength. I whispered to myself, almost ceremoniously, "You tried to belittle my years of work. Tomorrow we begin to show them the truth." The betrayal had been sharp, sudden, and petty, but it had awakened something more than indignation. It had ignited a methodical, measured response rooted in decades of passion and preparation. Clayton and his board had assumed victory before the battle even began. They did not yet realize that I had been preparing for this moment my entire life unknowingly. With every carefully documented invoice and every meticulously nurtured bloom, March 10th would be remembered not as the day my orchids were threatened, but as the day the seeds of their own undoing were planted, and I patiently would see them blossom into undeniable truth. March 11th. Sunset draped the Austin sky in molten gold and rose, painting my backyard in a fleeting warmth that belied the storm brewing in my mind. I walked slowly among the orchids, each step careful on the damp grass, dew glistening like tiny prisms on petals and leaves. The air carried the gentle hum of bees returning from their last pollination runs, a soothing rhythm that contrasted sharply with the tension I felt. Yesterday's HOA letter haunted me. Clayton's smirk had lingered in my thoughts, Infuriating yet oddly motivating. I'd spent decades nurturing these plants, some rare hybrids imported from Singapore, Thailand, and Ecuador, each one costing thousands, each one representing hours of tender care and sleepless nights, ensuring temperature, humidity, and light were perfect. And now, to have them labeled as weeds, my pride and legacy were under threat. I knelt by a golden phalaenopsis, running my fingers along its velvety petals, inhaling its soft fragrance. My chest tightened. The pride I felt was inseparable from fear of losing not just the orchids, but the respect of my neighbors, the community I had quietly contributed to over decades. Each bloom seemed fragile under my touch, a living reminder that beauty and value could be dismissed in an instant. As I checked the stakes supporting a $5,800 cattleya, I noticed Jenna on her porch, partially hidden by the flowering bougainvillea. She raised a hand subtly, signaling she had noticed something unusual. My instincts were sharp. She wasn't just observing, she was watching Clayton. And indeed, from the corner of my eye, I saw him pacing along the sidewalk near the clubhouse, clipboard in hand, whispering to Marcy while occasionally glancing in my direction. He was inspecting the gardens of other neighbors, casually condescending, ensuring they felt small yet compliant. The irony was almost poetic. He would mark a bush over-pruned or a daisy that leaned slightly outside the boundary line, yet his own judgment on true horticultural value was laughably shallow. The micro-observations stung. He underestimated how deeply someone could know and love their craft. I sat back on the edge of the stone fountain, exhaling slowly, letting my gaze sweep across the garden. I remembered the first time I had imported a Vanda tricolor alba, the weeks of acclimation, the precise watering schedule, the temperature logs I kept meticulously in a bound leather journal. Each invoice, each care note, every subtle photograph was a record of dedication. Now that record would be my shield and my weapon. Jenna, discreetly watching Clayton, noticed his condescending smile falter when a neighbor glanced his way. Even small, casual acknowledgments of the garden's true splendor threatened his inflated authority. I felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered with caution. Every witness mattered, every whisper mattered. Evidence would not only be in documents, but in the perception of those who had watched Clayton flaunt authority without merit. I checked my phone. Dr. Mills had replied to my morning text. Tomorrow we begin the appraisals. I want all receipts, photos, and shipment records ready. Clayton's letter is weak. We can make it airtight. Her words were both a comfort and a challenge. A meticulous botanist like her would not accept sloppy documentation, and I had to ensure every leaf, every invoice, every photograph aligned perfectly. Walking past the orchids, I noted the subtle variations in dew patterns, shadows cast by the low sun, and the faint scent of the soil mixed with blossom perfume. My eyes lingered on a $7,200 Vanda, its petals iridescent in the fading light. I photographed it, ensuring the timestamp matched my ledger, then carefully added notes about its exact placement in the garden. I knew Clayton would later claim misplacement as a violation. By recording everything precisely, I was preempting every possible argument. I reflected on the emotional weight of this moment. The betrayal wasn't just about plants. It was about decades of life, about pride, about having something cherished dismissed by petty authority. The frustration clawed at me, but I let it pass, focusing instead on methodical action. Rage was unnecessary. Precision would be far more devastating. As twilight deepened, I overheard Clayton's voice carried faintly from the sidewalk. "Old Man Turner? Those plants won't last another week if we enforce it properly," he muttered to Marcy, chuckling softly. My heart rate spiked for a moment, not with fear but with resolve. He believed he had leverage, that he could intimidate me. But in his arrogance he had left a trail of missteps, micro moments of hubris that would later unravel him. I retreated to my study, cross-referencing invoices and emails from rare plant vendors. Each purchase, each shipment, every appraiser's past correspondence was logged meticulously. I noticed a neighbor's casual glance toward the greenhouse when Jenna nodded subtly, a witness who might remember Clayton's condescension during casual walks. Every casual observation was a piece of the puzzle. Sitting at my desk, I let myself feel the weight of decades of care, of evenings spent adjusting grow lights, of patience tested by pests and errant weather. These orchids were more than plants. They were symbols of persistence, patience, and cultivated beauty. Clayton's attempt to reduce them to weeds was not just petty, it was personal, and I intended to ensure it remained personal in the most public, undeniable way. Before leaving the garden for the night, I whispered to myself, as if speaking to every bloom in the fading sunlight, "We will prove them wrong. Every detail, every invoice, every photograph. They will not escape scrutiny. They cannot erase what decades have nurtured." Jenna gave me a subtle thumbs up from her porch. I nodded, sensing that her quiet observation, paired with Dr. Mill's expertise, was a growing net of witnesses and allies forming around Clayton's arrogance. The first seeds of exposure were planted, and though tonight felt quiet, the garden's tension hummed like the bees, ready to burst into action. March 11th ended with a calm resolve. My pride, fear, and hope were intertwined, and every careful step taken today built the foundation for tomorrow's methodical strategy. Clayton had no idea that what he considered intimidation was only revealing the meticulous network I had been assembling for years, an intricate, precise defense and the groundwork for a poetic reckoning. March 12th, 14. The first morning of appraisals began with a damp chill settling over Austin. I had arranged for Dr. Mills to visit early, ensuring we could work with natural light filtering through the greenhouse windows. Each orchid glowed in the pale morning sun, dew still clinging to petals like tiny gems. I had organized every invoice, shipping log, and previous appraisal in chronological order, cross-referencing them against my ledger. Nothing could be overlooked. Dr. Mills arrived promptly at 7:45 a.m., carrying her professional tools, magnifying lupe, notebook, and camera. "Good morning, Elijah," she said, her tone measured but curious. "I've reviewed your correspondence. Your collection is rare and meticulously cared for. Let's begin the verification." I led her past the Vanda tricolor alba, pausing to highlight the precise growth notes I had kept since its arrival in 2018. Each detail mattered. Watering schedules, fertilization records, light cycles. "See this leaf?" I said. "Every mark documented, every anomaly accounted for." She knelt beside the plant, adjusting her loop. "Impressive," she murmured. "This one alone would fetch $7,500 in the current market." I photographed the appraisal session, ensuring the timestamp appeared on each image. Evidence had to be irrefutable. Throughout the day, we moved systematically through the garden, Dr. Mills appraising each orchid while I read invoices aloud. $3,200 for a Cattleya from Ecuador, $4,100 for a Phalaenopsis hybrid shipped from Singapore, $6,800 for a rare Vanda. Each number reinforced the tangible value of my collection. I documented her verbal appraisal notes alongside my own ledger entries, capturing every word. In between plants, Dr. Mills examined shipment records, cross-referencing dates and origins. I felt a surge of relief as each entry confirmed my meticulous record-keeping. Clayton's claim of weeds was not only incorrect, it was laughable when measured against certified market values and provenance. I paused by a golden Phalaenopsis, inhaling its faintly sweet fragrance. "Clayton will see this as defiance," I said aloud. Dr. Mills glanced at me. "He steps blind to the truth now, but the records will speak louder than arguments." That evening, I carefully uploaded all photos and notes to a secure cloud folder, each labeled by orchid name, invoice number, and appraisal value. I added Dr. Mills' signed appraisal summary as a PDF, time-stamped and ready for presentation. Every detail, every document, every photo was a piece of the puzzle, impeccable, irrefutable. March 13th, I reviewed the preliminary appraisal notes. Dr. Mills had calculated total collection value at $50,000, exactly matching my own records. She even highlighted exceptional specimens, noting their market rarity. I printed copies for cross-verification and stored them in a locked cabinet alongside scanned invoices and photos. That afternoon, I observed Clayton casually walking past my property from across the street, his overconfidence visible in his posture. He had no idea that I had already secured expert testimony, photographs, and a meticulously documented ledger. Each step he took, each smirk he displayed, only strengthened my resolve. I spent March 14th revisiting the garden, double-checking appraisals and photographing minor details, leaf veining, bloom color, subtle growth patterns. Dr. Mills assisted in drafting her final report, complete with images, market value, and provenance. Each orchid's appraisal was precise. A $3,500 Phalaenopsis with rare white petals, a $7,200 Vanda tricolor, and multiple mid-range specimens, each valued between $3,000 and $6,500. I also recorded brief videos of Dr. Mills examining key orchids, narrating their value and rarity, capturing both visual and verbal proof. These clips would later serve as undeniable evidence should the HOA dispute her written report. The microtension built steadily. Clayton's overconfidence remained my ally. He assumed my reaction would be reactive, emotional, or dismissive. Instead, I meticulously prepared evidence to leave no room for challenge. Every invoice, every shipment receipt, every appraisal note now formed a chronological narrative of diligence, care, and undeniable value. By nightfall, I reviewed the digital ledger, cross-referencing invoices, appraisal notes, photographs, and shipment receipts. I confirmed the integrity of my collection. Every piece of evidence was verified, documented, and time-stamped. I even added a final touch, a comparison sheet showing market values against Clayton's HOA standards, highlighting how absurd his weeds claim was. Before leaving the greenhouse, I whispered to myself among the orchids, their fragrance mingling with the damp air. This isn't set just about the plants. It sets about respect, accuracy, and truth. Tomorrow they will see it. The garden settled into twilight. Dr. Mills packed her equipment, leaving behind a stack of final appraisal sheets. I reviewed them once more, ensuring clarity, accuracy, and precision. This was no longer a garden dispute. It had evolved into a meticulous, irrefutable case. The stage was set for the next act, the ledger, the evidence, and the strategy that would expose Clayton's petty authority. March 14th ended with a quiet satisfaction. Every orchid had been appraised, every invoice verified, and every photograph accounted for. The stakes were clear. My collection, reputation, and decades of dedication now had documented proof. Clayton's authority, based on ignorance and envy, would soon meet the undeniable weight of fact. March 15th, 16. The sun rose over Austin like a quiet herald, bathing my backyard in soft golden light. Each orchid reflected the glow, petals shimmering with dew, as if acknowledging the meticulous care that had brought them to this moment. Today was dedicated to consolidation. Every invoice, appraisal, shipment receipt, email, and photograph needed to converge into one cohesive ledger. Precision was no longer optional, it was essential. I began by arranging all documents chronologically. Each invoice was aligned beside the corresponding photograph, appraiser's notes, and shipment record. The Vanda tricolor alba from Singapore, the golden cattleya from Ecuador, the Phalaenopsis hybrids. I ensured every detail matched. Dates, prices, and descriptions were double-checked. Minor discrepancies in formatting almost derailed the flow, but a quick correction and rescanning restored order. Each crinkle in a receipt, each annotation in the ledger, became a building block for the case I was constructing. I opened my laptop and cross-referenced every entry against Dr. Mills' appraisal notes. Total collection value $50,000, down to the exact dollar. I even created a summary sheet showing individual orchid values, provenance, and acquisition dates. This wasn't just organization, it was proof in a form Clayton could not ignore. Between typing and sorting, I felt the familiar tension of anticipation. Clayton had underestimated me at every turn. He assumed a horticulturist, no matter how principled, would lack the skill to construct an airtight narrative. He did not know that patience, care, and meticulous documentation were as much a part of my craft as tending to blooms. Around noon, I reviewed my emails with legal counsel. My lawyer had suggested including scanned copies of HOA correspondence, highlighting the exact language where Clayton had labeled my orchids as weeds. Combined with the appraisals and invoices, it would form an unassailable argument. I drafted formal complaints, ensuring each paragraph referenced specific evidence, invoice numbers, appraisal dates, shipment origins, and photographs. Every line reinforced legitimacy, emphasizing lawful, measured action over emotion. The garden felt alive that afternoon. Bees hummed lazily over blossoms, petals glinting in the late sun. I photographed a cluster of phalaenopsis in high resolution, capturing subtle color gradients and delicate textures. Each click of the shutter was a note in a symphony of documentation. I paused by a $6,500 Vanda, inhaling its faint scent. My mind drifted briefly to Clayton, imagining him boasting to Marcy and Peter about handling Turner's garden. His hubris would soon be his undoing. Every micro mistake he had made, dismissive remarks, condescending smiles, casual threats had been noted, documented, and stored. They were breadcrumbs leading to the inevitable revelation. March 16th brought focus to the compilation of evidence. I merged scanned receipts, invoices, and appraisal documents into a single, clearly labeled folder. Each digital file carried date stamps, descriptions, and cross-references. I printed a master ledger, binding it carefully, each page numbered and annotated. My collection was no longer just a garden. It was a verifiable archive of value, dedication, and authenticity. I also prepared the supplemental materials, photographs of orchid placement, greenhouse layout diagrams, GPS coordinates, and annotated observations from neighbors like Jenna. Even casual glances, subtle comments, and overlooked interactions became part of the narrative, contextual evidence reinforcing the collection's significance. As evening approached, I rehearsed the presentation in my mind. Every invoice, every appraisal note, every photograph would be a calculated step in exposing Clayton's overreach. I envisioned the HOA board meeting, the subtle astonishment on their faces as the ledger revealed the tangible and verifiable worth of the orchids. Every micro-obstacle that had arisen, the misaligned document, a faint smudge on a receipt, was now corrected, leaving nothing to chance. The final task that night was to create a digital backup. I uploaded scanned ledgers, appraisal reports, and photographs to a secure cloud storage, time-stamped and verified for integrity. Even if physical copies were challenged, the digital record would remain immutable. Every keystroke, every scanned page, every high-resolution image contributed to an airtight case. Standing once more in the garden, I let the cool March breeze brush against my face. The orchids shimmered faintly in the fading light, petals whispering resilience and persistence. I whispered to them, "Every detail is accounted for. Every effort is recorded. You are protected. And the truth will be seen." The ledger was no longer just numbers or invoices. It was a testament to dedication, a tangible manifestation of decades of care. Clayton's authority, rooted in petty oversight and arrogance, would crumble under its weight. Every small micro-mistake he had made, dismissive comments, casual threats, assuming my compliance, had been anticipated, documented, and cataloged. The methodical revenge was taking shape, patient, precise, lawful, and inevitable. March 16th ended with a sense of quiet victory. The garden, the documents, the photographs, and the appraisals were aligned into a cohesive narrative. Every orchid, every invoice, every piece of evidence became a silent witness to Clayton's misjudgment. Tomorrow, the whispers would begin, the first subtle moves in a social and strategic revelation that would culminate in the HOA meeting. The calm before confrontation was complete, and the stakes had never been higher. March 17th. The morning air carried the faint scent of freshly mown lawns, mingling with the subtle perfume of my orchids. I stepped into the garden, careful to avoid trampling dew-laden leaves, and let my gaze sweep across the rows of blooms. Each orchid shimmered under the early sun, a quiet testament to decades of care. But today my attention was partly elsewhere, toward the whispers that were already beginning to ripple through the neighborhood. I had been discreet. Only Jenna and a handful of neighbors were aware of the real value of my orchids. My aim was subtle social pressure, a gentle undermining of Clayton's authority without overt confrontation. As I watered the orchids, I noticed a neighbor glancing curiously toward the greenhouse. Jenna, standing just beyond the gate, offered a faint nod, a silent signal that information was moving quietly, yet intentionally. By mid-morning, a pattern emerged. Mrs. Whitaker, a neighbor who often prided herself on observing every detail in the community, had seen Dr. Mills inspecting the orchids days prior. She mentioned in passing to a few friends that Elijah's orchids might be more valuable than anyone realized. Such casual conversations carried more weight than I had anticipated. The ripples were spreading faster than expected, and Clayton's casual confidence was beginning to erode. I took photographs of specific orchids, annotating their market value, provenance, and condition. Each image was stored with precision, time-stamped, cross-referenced with invoices, and labeled by species. These images, along with Dr. Mill's appraisal report, would later serve as irrefutable evidence. But today their secondary purpose was subtler. They reinforced the narrative whispered from porch to porch, from neighbor to neighbor. Around noon I observed Clayton approaching the street corner near my property. His stride was confident, his posture impeccable, yet there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a subtle reaction to neighbors' hushed conversations. He stopped briefly, glancing toward the greenhouse, likely sensing that his authority was being quietly challenged. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to play at the corner of my mouth. The first micro shifts of power were happening, and they were not mine alone to orchestrate. Later, I compiled screenshots of HOA emails and texts, highlighting inconsistencies in their enforcement. One board member had previously overlooked a non-conforming bush in their own yard, yet now criticized my orchids. Another had sent a casual text confirming that Clayton's interpretation of weeds was subjective. Each detail reinforced a subtle narrative of hypocrisy, quietly reaching those who had ears to listen. Jenna delivered an update mid-afternoon. Neighbors are noticing. Clayton's usual bravado is cracking. He's smiling, but it's strained. Her observation confirmed what I had hoped. Social pressure was mounting before any direct confrontation. The whispers, small, innocuous seeming, were already tilting perception in my favor. I spent the rest of the afternoon photographing orchids under varying light, capturing subtle details like petal ruffling, coloration, and leaf sheen. Every image was cataloged, labeled, and backed up. Each photograph was more than documentation. It was evidence of dedication and authenticity, a counterpoint to Clayton's misjudgment. As evening descended, I walked slowly through the garden. The faint hum of bees had quieted, replaced by the whisper of wind through the magnolia branches. My gaze lingered on the golden phalaenopsis, its petals catching the last light of day. Every whisper counts, I murmured. Every observation, every note, every image is part of the story they will have to face. The day concluded with subtle victories. Clayton's micro missteps and my careful orchestration had begun to converge. Social perception, once entirely under his sway, was shifting. By strategically sharing details, quietly documenting evidence, and leveraging the observant ears of my allies, the neighborhood had begun to see the truth of my collection. The whispers, delicate yet persistent, were sowing seeds of doubt about Clayton's authority. March 17th closed with a sense of quiet, methodical momentum. Each orchid was accounted for, every micro-detail cataloged, and social influence subtly expanding. The foundation for the eventual public confrontation was forming. Clayton's confidence, built on ignorance and envy, was already showing the first cracks. March 18th. The garden lay bathed in the gentle glow of a mid-March morning. Sunlight filtered through the magnolia and oak, warming the dew-slick petals of my orchids. The faint hum of bees filled the air, and a soft breeze carried their delicate fragrance across the rows of blooms. Today was a day of preparation, careful, deliberate, and methodical. I walked slowly among the orchids, my fingers brushing against the velvety leaves of the Phalaenopsis hybrids, the intricate ruffles of the Cattleyas, and the vibrant patterns of the Vandas. Each plant seemed to shimmer with an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the coming storm. My ledger, bound and meticulously annotated, rested on a nearby table alongside high-resolution photographs, receipts, invoices, and Dr. Mill's appraisal reports. Everything was in order. Every detail, from acquisition dates to market value, was documented and cross-verified. Dr. Mills arrived mid-morning. She carried her notes, camera, and professional demeanor, ready to rehearse the testimony that would accompany the HOA meeting. Together we reviewed each orchid, checking photographs against physical specimens, and rehearsed her presentation. I could see her carefully noting which plants would best demonstrate rarity and market value, and I appreciated her meticulous attention to detail. Each rehearsal was a step closer to the precise, lawful exposure I had envisioned. Jenna appeared shortly after, perched discreetly on the edge of my porch. She observed silently, taking mental notes of Clayton's predictable arrogance. Even though he was unaware, she was another witness in the wings, ready to corroborate observations and add subtle social weight to the forthcoming confrontation. I revisited my ledger, cross-referencing invoices, emails, and photographs. A minor discrepancy in a shipment date from 2019 caught my eye, and I corrected it immediately. These micro details mattered. The slightest error could give Clayton an opening to deflect or distract. By 2 p.m., everything was synchronized, digital and physical copies backed up, organized, and ready for presentation. As the afternoon sun shifted, I observed Clayton from across the street, casual yet overconfident. He strutted toward the boardroom, discussing minor details of landscaping regulations with Marcy, oblivious to the silent preparation unfolding just yards away. He smiled, assuming the conflict would be easily resolved, never suspecting the meticulous strategy taking shape in my garden. His hubris was palpable, and in this calm before confrontation would become his undoing. I photographed the orchids again in late afternoon light, capturing subtle gradients, shadows, and dew droplets that enhanced their visual impact. These images were labeled meticulously, each tied to invoices, appraisal values, and shipment documentation. I knew that visual proof would resonate with the HOA and community, complementing Dr. Mill's expert testimony. By early evening, the garden was quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves. I walked the perimeter, checking locks, ensuring paths were clear, and verifying that no external factors could compromise the presentation. The orchids, now bathed in the amber light of sunset, seemed to glow with silent confidence. I whispered to them almost ceremoniously, "Tomorrow your story will be told. Every detail, every bloom, every documented step will speak for itself." The day concluded with a sense of measured anticipation. Every invoice, photograph, appraisal, and note had been rehearsed, verified, and backed up. Clayton's overconfidence had not waned, and that very arrogance would amplify the impact of the evidence. The calm before confrontation was complete, a deliberate pause before the precise orchestration of justice. March 19th. The day arrived with the sharp clarity of spring air in Austin. The sun slanted through freshly budding magnolias, illuminating my garden and casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the HOA clubhouse where the meeting would unfold. I parked my vintage truck along the curb, carrying the master ledger, high-resolution photographs, invoices, and Dr. Mill's appraisal reports. Every document, every photo, every meticulously recorded detail was a weapon, calibrated to reveal the truth. As I approached the clubhouse, I saw Clayton already there, clipboard in hand, his posture rigid and overconfident. Marcy and Peter flanked him like dutiful lieutenants. He smiled at me, the same condescending smile he had worn since the first weed notice. But there was something different today, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, subtle yet undeniable. I entered the room with calm authority, carrying my binder as if it were a shield. The board members murmured among themselves, unaware of the precise orchestration that awaited them. I set the ledger on the table and laid out the photographs and appraisal documents in neat, chronological order. Every orchid, every invoice, every appraisal had its place. Clayton spoke first, his tone attempting to assert control. "Mr. Turner, as you know, the board has determined that your plantings—" I interrupted gently but firmly, placing a photograph in front of him. "These are Vanda tricolor alba, imported from Singapore in 2018, valued at $7,500. Here is the invoice, shipment receipt, and Dr. Mill's SEPS appraisal. Let SEPS review them together." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Board members leaned forward, intrigued, some even shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Clayton's smirk faltered, replaced by a tight-lipped glance. I continued, presenting each orchid sequentially, referencing invoices, appraisal values, and shipment dates. The evidence was precise, irrefutable, and visually compelling. Dr. Mills stepped forward, her calm authority commanding attention. "I have personally appraised Mr. Turner's collection, Every specimen you see has been documented with provenance, acquisition date, and verified market value. The total assessed value of this collection is $50,000. These are not weeds, they are rare, valuable, and legally compliant with all HOA landscaping guidelines. Clayton opened his mouth, attempting to interrupt, but I held up a hand, signaling that every comment would be addressed in order. I presented side-by-side comparisons. HOA rules versus the documented compliance of each orchid, highlighting inconsistencies and contradictions. Every smug assertion he had made over the past week was countered with irrefutable evidence. Jenna, seated quietly in the back, observed silently, ready to corroborate micro-details. Her subtle nods, unnoticed by Clayton, reinforced the credibility of my narrative. The room felt charged, the tension palpable. Every small gesture, glance, and sigh was a micro-tension point, each reinforcing the inevitability of the revelation. I walked the board through the photographic documentation, showing close-ups of petals, leaf patterns, and orchid placement. Each image was linked to invoices and appraisals in the ledger. Clayton's hands fidgeted with his pen, his confidence waned visibly. I could see the mental calculations running through his mind, realizing that the authority he had wielded lightly was now being dismantled piece by piece. The climax approached as I presented the final summary sheet: total collection value, detailed provenance, shipment logs, and cross-referenced appraisal notes. I emphasized the precise compliance with all HOA guidelines. Clayton attempted one last interruption, citing subjective interpretation, but Dr. Mill's calm, authoritative rebuttal left no room for ambiguity. Board members exchanged glances. Whispers, previously subtle, now circulated openly. "I had no idea," one muttered. Another nodded, reviewing the ledger and photographs. Clayton's authority, once unquestioned, had been quietly dismantled, layer by layer. I stepped back, allowing the weight of evidence to settle. The orchids, the invoices, the appraisals, and expert testimony had done their work. Clayton's smirk had vanished, replaced by a rigid, colorless expression. He opened his mouth, then closed it, defeated silently. The room absorbed the truth with the inevitability of sunlight breaking through clouds. Jenna caught my eye briefly and smiled faintly. Her presence had been more than witness. It had been quiet reinforcement, a subtle social validation that amplified the impact of the evidence. Clayton had no allies left in that room. The combination of irrefutable documentation, expert testimony, and the subtle influence of neighbors had created a precise, lawful, and undeniable reckoning. As the meeting adjourned, I packed the ledger carefully, noting the impressed expressions on several board members' faces. Clayton lingered, offering a reluctant nod, acknowledging defeat without words. My orchids, bathed in the golden light streaming through the clubhouse windows, had emerged victorious. Every detail had mattered, every invoice, every photograph, every carefully documented note. The truth had been revealed. That night, back in my garden, I walked slowly among the orchids, inhaling the delicate fragrance, dew still glistening on petals. The hum of bees had returned, soft and persistent. I whispered to myself, they tried to diminish decades of care, but truth, patience, and precision always prevail. Iro Bekshin Safford Sign, Bekshin Senai the Duthard Hague in Dew. March 19th ended with a calm satisfaction. The public confrontation had been precise, lawful, and victorious. Clayton's authority had been exposed as petty and misguided. The community had witnessed irrefutable evidence, and my orchid's value, both financial and emotional, had been publicly recognized. The calm of my garden, the delicate light on each bloom, and the quiet hum of nature affirmed that justice, measured and meticulous, had prevailed. March 20th. The morning air carried a crisp clarity, the faint fragrance of my orchids mingling with the gentle hum of Austin's spring. The HOA had formally rescinded the notices overnight. I received the email around 9 a.m., a brief statement acknowledging the error in judgment and confirming that no further action would be taken against my garden. Clayton's name was attached, carefully worded, but I could see through the formalities he was humbled. I walked among the orchids, each bloom catching the morning light, petals vibrant and pristine. The golden phalaenopsis, the rare Vanda tricolor alba, and the cattleyas swayed gently in the breeze. I ran my fingers along the leaves, noting the subtle dew patterns, the iridescence in each petal, and the quiet strength that had carried the collection through so much scrutiny. Pride bloomed alongside relief, yet tempered by reflection. Every invoice, every photograph, every appraisal had mattered. Every micro-step of preparation had culminated in this moment of quiet vindication. Jenna stopped by mid-morning, carrying a small cup of coffee. "The neighborhood is talking," she said softly. "Clayton's humbled. People are finally seeing what you've been protecting all these years." I smiled, acknowledging the subtle social shift that had taken root during the prior days. Whispers and casual glances, once dismissed, had compounded into acknowledgement. Authority based on envy and ignorance had been quietly dismantled. I retrieved the master ledger and photographs, placing them in my study for safekeeping. Each document, carefully annotated, was more than proof. It was a chronicle of resilience, of methodical care, and of patience. I cross-referenced a few final details, ensuring that everything was perfectly archived. Every invoice matched an appraisal. Every photograph documented provenance. Every note linked to a date or shipment. The system was airtight. Clayton had left no room for challenge, and the community's perception had shifted irrevocably. Around noon, I noticed Clayton approaching from across the street. Hesitant and subdued, he avoided direct eye contact, his usual smirk absent. I acknowledged him with a brief nod, a silent recognition of the resolution. There was no triumph in gloating. The moment was quiet, deliberate, and precise. Retribution had been measured, lawful, and complete. I walked back into the garden, inhaling the gentle scent of orchids mingling with the earthy aroma of the soil. Each bloom seemed to stand taller, as if acknowledging the validation that had finally been conferred. I ran my fingers along a phalaenopsis, tracing the delicate curves of its petals, and whispered, "You endured, and so did we all." By afternoon, neighbors began stopping by, offering congratulations and subtle expressions of admiration. Their acknowledgement wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was quiet, sincere, and validating. Conversations carried soft praise for the orchid's rarity and beauty, coupled with acknowledgement of the methodical preparation that had protected the collection. The social equilibrium had shifted. Envy had been replaced by respect, and Clayton's authority quietly diminished in the community's perception. As evening approached, I walked slowly through the rows of orchids, each petal catching the fading sun like liquid gold. I reflected on the sequence of events: the initial betrayal, the careful documentation, the rehearsed appraisals, and the final revelation. Each step had mattered. Every invoice, photograph, and witness had contributed to the lawful restoration of respect and acknowledgement. Before night fell, I sat near the greenhouse, notebook in hand, and chronicled the events. HOA notices rescinded, appraisals confirmed, community perception shifted, and Clayton's authority diminished. I noted Jenna's observations, the subtle shifts in neighborly attitudes, and the quiet triumph of a measured, methodical approach. The garden, alive and fragrant, was the silent witness to the efficacy of patience, precision, and lawful action. March 20th closed with a sense of deep satisfaction. Retribution had been measured, social perception corrected, and the orchids themselves stood as a testament to decades of care. Every detail mattered. Every micro-step had contributed to an outcome that was both morally sound and practically irrefutable. The resonance of this victory would echo quietly, firmly, and unmistakably within the community. March 21st. The morning sun filtered softly through the live oaks lining my street, casting dappled patterns over my garden. Each orchid glimmered with dew, petals radiant in the quiet light. Today was about closure, a final acknowledgement of truth, a formal consolidation of justice. I arrived at the HOA office mid-morning, master ledger in hand. The board had agreed to archive all documents, officially noting the reversal of their previous judgment and acknowledging the legitimacy of my orchid collection. I handed copies of the complete appraisal reports, photographs, and invoices to the secretary, who carefully cross-referenced each entry. Every page, every signature, every annotation was now officially recognized and preserved. Clayton sat quietly at the back, his posture rigid and subdued. The board addressed him with a calm but firm tone, emphasizing the corrected record and the importance of objective assessment moving forward. I observed silently, noting the subtle tension in his expression. Authority grounded in petty bias had been replaced by lawfulness and fact, and he was fully aware of the weight of that shift. The secretary concluded, "All documentation has been filed and verified. The HOA acknowledges the appraisal of Mr. Turner Sip's orchid collection. Any further action regarding this matter is hereby null and void." I felt a surge of satisfaction, tempered by reflection. This was not merely about the orchids or financial value, it was about principles, about integrity, about methodical care prevailing over envy and arrogance. The board's acknowledgement represented a moral and procedural victory, restoring both reputation and respect. Walking back into the garden afterward, the air was fragrant with orchid blooms, and the hum of bees created a soft symphony. I moved carefully among the rows, touching petals, checking stakes, and noting subtle growth patterns. Each bloom seemed to echo the quiet triumph of truth upheld. My eyes lingered on the golden phalaenopsis, shimmering in the morning light, a symbol of diligence, patience, and measured action. Neighbors passed by, nodding with quiet respect. A few stopped to comment on the orchid's beauty, expressing admiration for the meticulous care evident in every detail. These gestures, small yet meaningful, reinforced the social restoration achieved alongside the formal acknowledgement from the HOA. I reflected on the journey, the initial betrayal, the careful documentation, the expert appraisal, the subtle social influence, and finally the public confirmation of truth. Every step had mattered. Every invoice, photograph, and appraisal had been a building block leading to this moment. Justice had not been swift or flashy, but deliberate, lawful, and undeniably effective. By late afternoon, I settled near the greenhouse, inhaling the soft, sweet scent of orchids mingling with the earthy aroma of the soil. I opened my ledger one last time, reviewing the sequence of events, noting each action that had led to this formal vindication. I traced the timeline March 10th through 21, every detail accounted for, every micro-step recorded. It was a living record of both dedication and justice. March 21st concluded with a deep sense of fulfillment. The orchids, the documents, and the careful orchestration of truth had all converged to restore balance. Clayton's authority, once inflated by envy and petty oversight, was rightfully tempered. Social perception aligned with fact, and the principle of measured, methodical justice had been affirmed. Walking among my orchids in the late afternoon light, I whispered, "Justice blooms when patience meets precision. Truth, meticulously documented, cannot be denied." The fragrance, the soft rustle of leaves, and the quiet hum of nature affirmed that both moral and tangible victory had been achieved. The morning of March 22nd arrived with soft, golden sunlight spilling across my garden. The air was warm but carried a faint, crisp edge, the perfect spring morning in Austin. My orchids glimmered with dew, petals alive with color, and the faint hum of bees filled the space between the rows. Every scent, every detail seemed magnified, as if the garden itself knew the quiet justice that had been achieved. I walked slowly, deliberately, through the greenhouse and the outer garden paths, fingers brushing against velvety phalaenopsis petals, the ruffled edges of cattleyas, the intricate patterns of vandas. I inhaled deeply. Each orchid carried a memory, the sleepless nights nurturing their first blooms, the careful adjustments of light and humidity, the meticulous records kept over decades. They were more than plants. They were living embodiments of patience, care, and resilience. Looking back, the events of the past 12 days felt like a carefully orchestrated dance. From Clayton's petty weed notice on March 10th to Dr. Mill's expert appraisals, the meticulous documentation, the whispers among neighbors, and finally the HOA meeting and formal archival of evidence, it had all led to this quiet moment. Every step, no matter how small, had mattered. I paused by the golden phalaenopsis, brushing away a dew-laden leaf. The flower seemed to catch the sunlight just so, illuminating the delicate veins in the petals. I whispered softly, almost as a vow, "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." The aphorism resonated, a reminder that true loss is only what others can take. Everything I had cultivated, meticulously documented, and defended remained intact, a testament to persistence and care. Neighbors passed by, offering nods and small smiles of recognition. Some remarked on the orchid's beauty, others on the meticulous layout and care, but none could challenge the visible evidence of dedication. Social perception had aligned with truth. Clayton's authority, based on envy and petty oversight, had been tempered by lawfulness, documentation, and expert verification. The garden's silent witness spoke volumes, louder than any words or threats ever could. I returned to the ledger one last time, opening it carefully and reviewing the sequence of events: invoices, appraisals, photographs, witness statements, and emails. Every micro detail had contributed to the outcome. Every element had been accounted for, and every document backed up digitally. The ledger was more than a collection of papers. It was a chronicle of justice, a manifestation of deliberate, measured action. The garden itself seemed to respond to the calm. Petals swayed gently in the breeze. The sun warmed the soil, and the faint fragrance of orchids mingled with the earthy scent of spring. I breathed deeply, letting the quiet affirmation of nature settle over me. Here, among these blooms, the culmination of meticulous care, patience, and moral persistence felt tangible. I knelt beside a particularly rare vanda, noting the shimmer of its petals in the morning light. A bee hovered briefly, as if acknowledging the quiet victory. I smiled, understanding that the confrontation, the evidence, the meticulous documentation, it had all led to this: a garden at peace, a legacy intact, and truth prevailing. March 22nd ended with a profound sense of closure. Walking among my orchids, feeling the sunlight and gentle breeze, inhaling the faint but unmistakable fragrance, I knew that every step, every invoice, every careful record had contributed to the ultimate vindication. And in that quiet triumph, the lesson was clear: patience, preparation, and moral precision are far stronger than arrogance, envy, or petty authority. I lingered in the garden until the sun began its descent, whispering once more to the blooms, "You didn't lose me, you gave me away." The words echoed softly, a final affirmation that justice methodically pursued blooms quietly but unmistakably, leaving behind a legacy that cannot be erased. March 23rd. Clayton walked past my garden with the air of someone acutely aware of his own misjudgment. There was no smirk, no condescending glance, only a quiet acknowledgment, almost imperceptible, of the oversight that had defined the past 2 weeks. I noticed it from my porch. His posture was rigid, eyes briefly scanning the blooms, then dropping in a subtle nod of recognition. The HOA had already archived all documents, rescinded notices, and formally acknowledged the legitimacy of my orchids. Clayton had attempted to maintain authority throughout, but the methodical, irrefutable documentation, coupled with Dr. Mill's expertise and neighbor observation, had left him with no room to maneuver. The social and procedural equilibrium had shifted, and he knew it. I reflected on the irony: his arrogance had been his undoing. Each small micro-mistake he made, the casual condescension, the assumption of my compliance, the overconfidence in his weed labeling, had been quietly documented and eventually exposed. Now his quiet demeanor suggested that he had internalized the lesson, humbled by both evidence and perception. Later in the day, I observed him speaking with Marcy and Peter. His voice was measured, cautious, lacking the brashness that had previously characterized his interactions. Even the way he gestured seemed tempered, deliberate. It was clear that the events surrounding my orchids had left a lasting impression. He understood, at least tacitly, that authority untempered by respect, integrity, and truth is fragile. I walked past him briefly, offering a polite nod. His eyes met mine for a moment, brief, acknowledging, and silently reflective. No words were exchanged, yet the acknowledgment carried weight. Clayton's lesson was subtle but undeniable. The arrogance that stems from envy and ignorance cannot withstand meticulous preparation and factual truth. By evening, the neighborhood carried on as usual, but a subtle undercurrent of recognition had shifted toward fairness and respect. Clayton's quiet reflection, observed by others, would shape future interactions. Authority, once unchallenged, had been tempered by evidence and integrity. My orchids, silent witnesses to the sequence of events, had not only survived but had also indirectly educated those who sought to diminish them. March 23rd concluded with a quiet satisfaction. Justice had not only been achieved for the orchids, but also imparted in a subtle and lasting way a lesson to Clayton. Patience, preparation, and moral precision had prevailed without malice. Only truth, documented and undeniable. March 24th. The morning sun bathed my garden in a gentle golden light. The orchids glimmered, dew sparkling on petals like tiny prisms. Each bloom seemed to shimmer with quiet pride, a testament to decades of care and meticulous attention. Today felt lighter, freer after the HOA ordeal, the victories, and Clayton's humbled acknowledgement. A sense of calm and satisfaction settled over the garden. A neighbor approached, carefully walking along the path between my orchids. She paused, her eyes wide with admiration. "Elijah," she said softly, "your garden itself's incredible. Have you ever considered selling it? I accept pay anything to have this in my own backyard." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "Some things aren't sit for sale," I replied, running a finger along a golden phalaenopsis. "These aren't sit just plants. They sit there decades of care, patience, and dedication. Priceless, really." Her gaze lingered over the blooms, lingering on the rare vandas and delicate cattleyas. "I understand," she said with a smile. Stepping back, "It seps more than a garden. It seps a legacy." I walked slowly among the rows, inhaling the faint fragrance, feeling the warmth of sunlight on my face. Every invoice, every photograph, every appraisal had been validated and archived. The community had witnessed the truth. Clayton had learned his lesson, and my orchids had been preserved in both value and dignity. The quiet irony of the moment was not lost on me. What Clayton had dismissed as weeds was now universally acknowledged as priceless. I paused by the Vanda tricolor alba, tracing its delicate petals. "You survived, and so did we all," I whispered. The garden, vibrant and fragrant, stood as a living testament to perseverance, meticulous care, and the quiet power of methodical, lawful justice. March 24th closed with a deep sense of fulfillment. My orchids remained intact, cherished and respected, while those who had sought to diminish them were reminded that patience, preparation, and truth cannot be dismissed. The blooms, resilient and radiant, would continue to tell their story long after the events had passed, a legacy preserved for years to come.